Today, we're going to show you how you can replace a fancy watercolor set like this with pigments you can find from your kitchen, your pantry, and your garden. You can make a whole rainbow of colors using just the things you might have already at home. Materials that you'll need for today will be a water bin and a paintbrush, some small dishes for mixing, leaves, flowers, fruit, vegetables, juices, sauces, spices, really anything that you can find that are safe to use yourself. First thing you want to do is make a grid so you can record some of the pigments that you make and what works best for you. You'll need a tester page as well. Here's an example if you want to pause this video to make your own. Next, it's time to go on an epic journey and gather supplies to prepare pigments. You may not know exactly how they'll look once you paint them on a page, but you should find anything that you think will make color. I will give you some suggestions in this video, but that doesn't mean this is the end. You should try to find all the things in your home that you can make some pigments with. The next step is testing, and I'm going to start with this herbal tea. It's a berry herbal tea, and before I go to my grid, I always want to try it on my test page and see how it looks. It's very weak. If I used a little less water and brewed it for longer, it might have been a stronger color. I'm going to try another kind of herbal tea using different fruits. So these might work for some red. I think I definitely have learned a lot through this process. I would brew them much longer than I did here. After I test, I'm going to label what each color was. So I'm writing herbal tea here. Some items need a little less preparation. So for instance, if I take this strawberry and I just rub it on my paper, I'll get a very gentle red color. I'm curious if this will work with any other berries that I had in my fridge. Let's try it with a raspberry. So first I'm going to test it on my tester paper. That's an even better red, so I'm just going to layer them. And I'm going to take my pencil and label that it's raspberry. This next idea I had for red came from something I got as a souvenir when I traveled to Arizona. I got this prickly pear syrup that's a really bright magenta color, so I'm going to try it out. It's definitely brighter than my tea, maybe not as bright as my raspberries. Now I'd like to figure out some oranges, and I know that my cayenne might be a good choice for that. I used cayenne pepper that I found in my spice cabinet, and I'm mixing it with a little bit of water. Let's try it out. Yeah, that's a very nice reddish orange. I think it will work well. My next orange comes from my fridge. And I noticed that some hot sauce in my fridge looked orange in the bottle. Let's see how it looks on my tester piece of paper. Not quite as intense, but I think it's orange enough for me. So I'll paint it and label it. As I was making lunch today, I noticed that the powdered cheese for my macaroni and cheese was very orange. So I'm going to mix that with a little bit of water and see how it looks when I try it on my tester. Let's see. It's hard to tell whether I think this one is more yellow or orange, but I'm going to start with some yellow. I think it's definitely closer to yellow than it is to orange. Make sure to label that macaroni and cheese, powdered cheese, and let's try a classic pigment for yellow that I found in my spice cabinet. This pigment is turmeric, and turmeric is powdered, and I'm going to mix it with a little bit of water on my brush, and you can see that that is an intense color. I already knew that it was a very bright yellow, so I didn't even put it on my tester plate this time. Next up, I found some spicy Chinese style mustard in my fridge. If you have yellow mustard, that would be an even brighter color, but I'm mixing that with some turmeric to see how it looks. And it's still a pretty nice intense color. The mustard gives it a much smoother appearance than just the powdered turmeric itself. Next up is green, and I am lucky enough to have some pesto in my fridge already, and this was made with a ground spinach. I also have some basil leaves I've used earlier, and I have some wasabi paste that I found in my fridge, so I'm going to try all these greens. This pesto, I'm going to test it out. It looks a lot less intense when it's spread out thin, so I'm going to glob it on, make sure I label that it's pesto. I could even write that it's pesto made with spinach. And if you take a look at this leaf, the first time I used it, it was actually bright green, but I've left it a few minutes after I tested it earlier, and it oxidized. The oxygen that hit the walls of the leaf made it much more brown than the first time I tried it. The next one I'm going to try is wasabi paste, which is a spicy horseradish. And oh man, that's a lovely color. It's one of my favorites. I'm going to label that wasabi. Now it's time to move on to the trickier ones, blues and purples. If you noticed earlier in the video, I was boiling some red cabbage on the stove. To make this blue pigment, I boiled some red cabbage in a little bit of water, and then I added a small amount of baking soda to that. You can see it's nice and bright blue. If I wanted it to be more intense, I could put it on the stove longer and let some of the water evaporate. To make purple, I would do the same thing with my red cabbage, but I would not add baking soda. So I set some purple juice aside from my red cabbage on the stove, and you'll see here that it's a nice bright purple. Be careful not to mix any of the baking soda from the blue into your purple pigment. If you're lucky enough to have blackberries in your kitchen, they make a great deep purple, especially if you crush them in a separate dish. But today I'm just testing mine out and rubbing it across the paper. Make sure you label everything you try. Some of the easiest pigments to find will be in the neutral category, colors like black, gray, and brown. And the first item I'm trying here is some dark chocolate cocoa powder. It makes a really great deep color, and you can make it lighter if you add some more water to it, but I like a nice intense tone. Coffee, either instant coffee or brewed coffee, makes a really lovely brown color, and it's got a bit more of an orange tone to it than the cocoa powder you can see. You can also use a black tea for this, but it will be less intense than the coffee. For my next brown, I'm going to try some soy sauce, and you'll see that's a very similar color to the coffee, but perhaps a bit more gray, a little less orange tone to it. At this point, I might want to combine some items to see if I can make more intense versions of each. But of course, once I try them out, I want to make sure that I know what went into each one, so I'm going to record those recipes. So here I have paprika mixed with my prickly pear syrup, and I think that's a much nicer, intense red. So I can keep experimenting by combining. So here's some turmeric mixed with mustard, and a little bit more of the cayenne pepper too. Let's see how that looks together. Oh yeah, that's a great orange. I'm happy with that. You can certainly achieve some really intense colors using natural items, but let's say you want to try something like makeup or perhaps some food coloring. Might be kind of a cheat, but it's also great to use if you want to get very vibrant colors. So for instance, this is green food coloring, and I'm going to test it out with a little water on my brush. It's very intense, so I can use this diluted with lots more water if I want a lighter green. And I make sure to label. And a lot of blues can be really hard, so makeup can be a great way to achieve some blue pigment. And I'm using some of this eyeshadow palette with a brush mixed with water. You can see that's really vibrant, nice bright blue. Something you should also do is wait to observe your pigments, maybe even overnight, so they can dry. And you might be surprised with how things change. For instance, my herbal tea turned almost a gray purple color, and my red cabbage with baking soda turned a bit green. So it's really important to see how things might turn out over a little bit of time as they evaporate or oxidize to make sure your final paintings look the way you intend them to. After trying this experiment once, I can guarantee that you'll be looking for pigments in nature around you all the time, and you'll be really surprised by the range of colors you can find in your everyday life.